The room was dense with armed officers, state troopers, tactical supervisors, and a pair of grim-faced federal liaisons who had been dragged into this mess after too many bodies surfaced with the Butcher Boy's signature on them. Mara tapped the map one last time. Clubhouse schematic, entry vectors, blind spots, the rear exit that had to be sealed first if they wanted Big John boxed in. No theatrics, no speech. Just the cold clarity before steel meets blood. She told them exactly where they'd go, who'd anchor the perimeter, who'd cut the power, and which unit would give the verbal call-out. A hum of rifles being checked rolled through the room as she dismissed them with a curt nod. The kind that promised the night wouldn't end clean for anyone involved. The convoy rolled through the dark like a slow-moving thunderhead. Engines low, radios tight. The clubhouse rose ahead, an ugly slab of concrete and corrugated metal pulsing with faint music that slipped through the seams. As the vehicles locked into position, blue lights strobed across the dirt lot, painting the scene in frantic flashes. Officers fanned out, rifles raised, boots grinding through gravel. A bullhorn cracked through the night, sharp enough to rattle the windows. "Big John, step outside with your hands up." The echo barely settled before shadows shifted behind the door, silhouettes gathering, the tension snapping like wire pulled too tight. Then the first muzzle flash ripped the dark open, followed by an answering burst from the entry team. The air exploded into chaos. Shattered glass raining down, rounds slamming into metal, the roar of gunfire rolling off the walls. A state trooper hit the ground with a hollow grunt, body twisting as he fell, blood spreading across his vest. A gang member dropped almost instantly after, thrown back into the doorway by a precise shot that punched clean through his chest. The shootout surged into a vicious rhythm, weapons barking from both sides until the command team forced the front back under control. Officers pushed hard, breaching, sweeping, dragging the wounded out, but Big John wasn't in the front rooms. He was already pushing through the dim hallway toward the rear exit, boots hammering against the floorboards, shoulders powering through the door just as two perimeter officers spun toward him. The first officer barely had time to bring his rifle up before Big John slammed into him. A brutal collision that tore the weapon from his grip. The second officer lunged in, reaching for his sidearm. But Big John wrenched the first officer's arm, twisted, and drove him hard into the dirt. The crack of his neck was a sharp, sickening snap swallowed by the gunfire still raging up front. The surviving officer tried to backpedal, but Big John was already ripping the fallen rifle from the ground, bringing it around in a sweeping arc. A quick burst sent the officer scrambling behind a patrol vehicle as Big John bolted across the property line and vanished into the thick brush bordering the lot, swallowed by darkness. Within minutes, the search surged outward, flashlights cutting through the woods, dogs barking, radio chatter crackling with frantic calls. Mara Hollis coordinated the dragnet with the precision of someone who'd chased monsters before, but Big John moved like a ghost, slipping between trees, mud, and ravines with animal purpose. By dawn, he was still gone, and the story had already broken across every morning broadcast. A high-ranking member of the Butcher Boys had killed an officer during a raid, was armed with a stolen assault rifle, and was considered extremely dangerous. Live anchors stood outside the police cordon with practiced grave expressions, reciting every detail available and warning residents to stay indoors. Andrew sat slouched in his recliner, crumbs dusting his shirt. Remote balanced on his stomach as he flipped between channels. The news panel replayed the same footage of flashing lights, officers sprinting, and the collapsed figure being wheeled onto a stretcher. Then came the mention of the murdered woman found in the lake, now officially connected to the biker war unfolding across the province. Andrew paused mid-chew, eyes narrowing as the anchor listed the details. "That's a sin, Bay," he muttered, shaking his head at the sight of her photo on the screen. He clicked the volume up, leaning forward, completely unaware that the night's violence had only just begun. Blue dawn bled slowly across the tree line as the dragnet widened, and every roadblock, checkpoint, and cruiser in the county bristled with tension, stretched thin as wire. Helicopter rotors carved the morning air, sweeping low over the brush where Big John had vanished hours earlier, their searchlights slicing across ravines and marsh beds, still heavy with night fog. Detective Mara Hollis stood at the mobile command post, boots sunk into mud, radio pressed tight to her ear as one unit after another checked in with negative reports. She'd been awake for nearly 30 hours, and the weight of the fallen officer clung to her like a shadow. She studied the terrain map spread across the hood of a patrol SUV, tracing the possible escape routes, logging roads, ATV paths, old hunting cut lines, every artery that could feed Big John into the next county before the public even finished their morning coffee. She ordered fresh units to lock down the highway on-ramps and a canine team to sweep the riverbanks. None of it felt fast enough. The air thickened with the metallic tang of exhaust as more cruisers arrived, lights pulsing in a restless rhythm. Officers stepped out with grim faces, expressions carved into stoic masks for the cameras gathering at the perimeter lines. Reporters shouted questions, none of which Mara bothered to acknowledge. Instead, she strode to the staging area where gear lay scattered. Spent shell casings collected in evidence bags, blood-stained gloves discarded after medics pronounced the trooper dead, rifles lined for inspection. The forensic team moved through the clubhouse remains, marking bullet impacts in walls blown apart by the firefight, photographing drag marks, sorting through broken furniture. A faint haze of burned powder still lingered, caught in beams of morning light streaming through shattered windows. Mara stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the carnage left behind. She'd seen plenty of scenes in her career, but something about this one, the violence carved with such deliberate precision, told her Big John hadn't panicked. He'd known exactly what he was doing the moment he tore out that rear exit. Squad leaders approached with their updates. Nothing in the West Ravine, nothing along the river trail, nothing in the old mill yard. Mara tightened her grip on the tablet showing the search grid, as if she could squeeze meaning from the cluster of red marks. Somewhere out there, a man with an assault rifle, soaked in blood and adrenaline, was navigating familiar ground while officers tripped her over roots and underbrush trying to catch him. She called for drones to launch from the north clearing, their engines buzzing to life as technicians booted their thermal sensors. The sky filled with small mechanical shapes, drifting upward, combing the wilderness in widening circles. Mara stepped back, watching their feed stream onto her screen. Cold blue forests, pockets of warm scattered deer, raccoons, birds, but no human heat signature large enough to match Big John. He was burrowed deep, waiting, or moving with enough discipline to stay out of every open line of sight. The thought crawled under her skin. The search pressurized the entire county within hours. Businesses delayed opening. School buses rerouted. Local radio hosts spoke in clipped, uneasy tones as they relayed the manhunt updates to listeners just trying to drink their morning coffee without imagining a gunman in the tree line near their backyard. The mayor issued a brief statement. The sheriff's office sent out alerts across social media warning residents to report anything suspicious. Helicopters circled every few minutes, their shadows gliding over porches and rooftops. Police cruisers prowled subdivisions with their windows down, scanning for movement behind sheds, garbage bins, and tall grass. Mara's phone vibrated relentlessly, state officials, federal contacts, her captain demanding updates. Every question carried the same cold core. Asterisk, where is Big John? She answered each one with the same steady voice, refusing to let them hear the frustration grinding inside her. Around mid-morning, 2 officers discovered a patch of flattened foliage near a deer trail, along with boot impressions pressed deep into mud. Mara arrived fast, crouching beside the tracks. The pattern matched the tactical boots Big John had worn during the raid. Beside those prints were broken branches, snapped in a direction leading downhill toward a creek bed. She radioed for nearby units to shift their positions. Officers moved through the brush cautiously, rifles up, breath controlled. For a moment, tension rippled through the forest. Birds falling silent, leaves stilling in the breeze, as if the woods themselves anticipated another burst of violence. But when the team reached the creek, the trail simply dissolved. Water churned where footprints had once been, the current carrying away any answer. Mara stared at the flow, jaw tightening. Big John hadn't just run. He had used the terrain with practiced familiarity, washing away his path and slipping into a network of old logging cuts that stretched for miles. News coverage amplified by noon. Every station aired the same grainy footage of Big John from earlier arrests. Tattoos on his forearms, bulk that made him look carved from a block of iron, that unmistakable glare like someone studying the quickest way to disassemble whoever stood across from him. Analysts gathered on panels pretending they understood the Butcher Boy's internal hierarchy. They speculated about retaliation, safe houses, alliances with other chapters. None of them knew the reality Mara knew. Big John wasn't running to hide. He was running to reposition. And the longer he stayed loose, the more bodies would stack up. Out in the field, Mara continued commanding her search teams, voice low and unyielding as she sharpened the perimeter a little tighter each hour. The woods remained stubborn and quiet. The kind of quiet that made officers uneasy behind their vests. Dogs sniffed through undergrowth. Tactical boots pressed fresh impressions into damp soil. Radios whispered orders. And somewhere beyond all that human noise, Big John kept moving, silent as a shadow, slipping deeper into terrain that had always favored men willing to fight their way out of any corner. By dusk, the day's sunlight had turned the forest amber, casting long bands of gold across the ground where officers trudged with heavy strides. Mara ordered a staggered withdrawal of non-essential units while maintaining the crucial blockade points. She leaned against the hood of a cruiser for a moment, letting the cold metal wick some of the heat from her skin. Her mind replayed every second of the raid, the muzzle flashes, the fallen officer, the snap of vertebra as Big John ended a life with nothing more than brute force. She knew the chase would stretch into the night again. She also knew Big John wasn't done putting bodies in the ground, not by a long shot. Wind swept through the canopy with a low, hollow moan as night sealed itself across the forest, shrouding the search perimeter in darkness so dense it seemed alive. Searchlights moved in wide arcs through the timber, slicing pale spears across branches that swayed like restless silhouettes. Detective Mara Hollis stood in the command zone with her rifle slung tight and her mind locked into a sharpened edge. The woods had taken on a strange tension, an almost sentient stillness that pressed against her eardrums. She'd hunted fugitives before, but never one who radiated such cold, unwavering intent. Every officer sensed it. Radios murmured fractured updates. Dogs strained against their handlers. The entire operation hung on a brittle thread that threatened to snap with the slightest motion. Big John crouched several hundred yards away, hidden between rotting stumps and thick bramble, his breath slow and measured. Mud streaked his arms, blood dried in dark patches along his ribs, and the stolen rifle lay across his lap like an extension of his will. He studied the patrol lines with a hunter's patience, tracking the rhythm of each beam. He felt the thrum of his pulse beating through his shoulders, steady and powerful. A pain rolled through him in deep waves, but pain had always been a familiar companion. Not something to fear, but something to ride until it sharpened him. He rose with deliberate control, tilting his head to listen. As officers moved through brush, he had no intention of surrender. Tonight wasn't about escape anymore. Tonight was about leaving a scar on the world. The first officer who drifted too close became the opening strike. A whisper of movement disrupted the ferns, and before the man could pivot, Big John fired a single round that drove through the back of his vest and pushed him forward into the dirt. The second officer shouted for him, raising his weapon, but Big John surged through the undergrowth with brutal speed, firing short bursts that pinned the man against a tree. Bark exploded in sprays. The officer dropped to his knees, weapon slipping from his grip, breath hitching in disbelief as Big John advanced and finished him with a cold precision that echoed through the timber. The forest ignited. Flares burst overhead. Search beams locked onto the ridge. Officers scrambled to form a defensive line as Big John moved like a predator born from shadow. Mara sprinted toward the north sector with an intensity that drove her feet faster than thought. The air shook with shouted orders and panicked footsteps as officers attempted to tighten the perimeter. She wasn't panicking, though. Fury sharpened her focus, clearing the static from her mind. She vaulted fallen branches, weaving through brush, and caught glimpses of muzzle flashes blinking like angry stars. Big John tore through the clearing ahead, rifle bucking against his shoulder as he unleashed a barrage that punched through windshields and shattered mirrors. A cruiser rocked under the assault, sparks jumping from the metal as the hood crumpled inward. Officers dove behind rocks and dirt mounds, shouting for angles. One sent a volley toward the ridge, but Big John rolled behind a boulder and returned fire with crushing accuracy that sent the man tumbling backward, grasping his vest as blood spread across his torso. A canine unit cut in from the flank, the dog launching with fierce commitment, its jaws locked around Big John's forearm, the weight driving him sideways, but he twisted with gruesome strength, slamming the animal against the trunk of an oak. The dog yelped and collapsed. The handler screamed and charged forward, firing while sprinting, but Big John dropped low, rushed into the man's legs, and drove him to the ground with a blow that knocked the wind from his lungs. A single gunshot ended the struggle. Mara arrived with her team as the clearing turned into a battlefield. Dirt churned under boots. Muzzle blasts carved violent strokes across the dark. Big John's silhouette shifted between trunks, rifle raised, body moving with mechanical brutality. Mara braced her rifle and fired disciplined bursts, each shot aimed to pin him towards the ravine. Officers fanned out in a tightening arc, bullets shredding saplings and throwing wood chips through the air like shrapnel. Yet Big John plowed through the chaos, firing from the hip, every recoil absorbed by sheer will. He smashed through a fallen cedar, vaulted over a chest-high stump, and hurled himself into the thickest concentration of officers. One officer attempted to block him, raising his rifle to chest level, but Big John seized the barrel, yanked it downward, and slammed his elbow across the man's jaw with a force that knocked him unconscious before he hit the ground. Another officer tried a flank attack, but Big John caught him mid-lunge, drove a knee into his ribs, and sent him crashing into a tree trunk with a groan that faded instantly. He moved through bodies like a living wrecking ram, absorbing hits, landing blows with terrifying accuracy, firing whenever he had a clear shot. Even wounded, he was relentless. Blood poured down his side in thick streams, soaking into the waistband of his jeans, but his stride never faltered. He swept the rifle toward a pair of officers attempting to circle him, sending rounds carving through branches, snapping limbs, driving them back in panic. One stumbled, tripped on a root, and Big John blinded him with a flash of gunfire that left him motionless. Mara saw the opening forming, a moment where Big John shifted his weight too far left, reloading as he advanced toward a cluster of boulders. She inhaled, steadied her aim, and charged forward with 2 officers bracketing her sides. They fired as they closed in, bullets cracking against tree trunks and kicking up dust around Big John's feet. He pivoted, raising the rifle toward them, but Mara dropped to a slide, firing up from her knees. The round struck his shoulder and torso, jerking him backward. He roared, staggered, then fired a blind sweep that forced her behind a log. He should have fallen. Any normal man would have buckled under the hits. But Big John was built out of scar tissue and fury. He steadied himself, panting through the clenched teeth, and stormed toward her position with the determination of someone determined to drag every soul around him into the grave. Mara rose from behind the log as 3 more units converged, their headlights piercing the gloom. The forest vibrated with the rumble of engines and the relentless thunder of gunfire. Officers took positions across the clearing, sealing every gap. Their rifles rose in unison the moment Big John broke into the open. He charged with a final, monstrous burst of power, rifle blazing, bullets whistling past helmets, slamming into trunks, smashing stones into dust. Mara fired into him again and again, each shot pushing him backward. Officers joined her, forming a furious chorus of gunfire that hammered into his body with unrestrained force. The assault finally ate through the last of his strength. The rifle slipped from his grasp, clattered against rock, and Big John staggered like a man caught between worlds. He attempted one last step, boots dragging through mud, breath ragged and sharp, his eyes locked onto Mara, darks, unbroken, refusing to surrender even as his body betrayed him. For a second, everything stilled. The wind, the shouting, the lights. Every soul in the clearing watched the final moment unfold like a judgment passed by the night itself. Mara cursed. "Gotcha, you piece of shit!" Mara fired the last shot. 11. The news broadcast cut through the quiet with a